His life ended in a gruesome act of incredible brutality.
I saw him hack at the head, and I saw the flesh be ripped apart.
And then he's discarded like trash.
He thought that it was a bag of meat with the flies swarming around it.
The only clue was a message cut into the victim's torso.
Someone had carved the words, "Blood's rule."
When it comes to gangs, the situation could be fatal.
Is it a clue or a false lead?
Oftentimes, perpetrators think they are smarter than cops.
But who is the monster capable of such cruelty?
He flirted with his girlfriend. He was a very angry man.
He did one of the sickest things anybody could do.
It just seems unreal.
And how many people are involved?
He didn't care who he was going to bring down with him.
It's almost like a spider web.
The more people know, the harder the secret is to keep.
I feel bad for you. I feel bad for you too.
July 8th, 2001. It's a sleepy Sunday afternoon in Chippewa County, Wisconsin, a rural community 2 hours east of Minneapolis.
Chippewa County is known for being quite foresty, lots of lakes, known for rustic getaways.
Very family-oriented community, very quiet, peaceful, and quaint.
It's the region's rustic charm that has brought Elroy Leha out to his property just east of Otter Lake.
Elroy was the owner of a vacant property that he was looking to sell. He had a potential buyer that was coming to view the home, and as he was cleaning up, he noticed a bag with flies swarming around it.
And as he gets closer, there is this horrible smell.
Curious as to what is causing the odor, Mr. Leha cautiously opens the bag.
He cannot believe what he sees.
To his shock and dismay, it was actually a dismembered torso.
He immediately called the police.
Little does he know that the case will lead police more than an hour away to St. Paul, Minnesota.
130 miles west was a mother who was trying to reach her son.
Her son is 20-year-old Bobby Holder.
But no one had seemed to see Bobby the past couple days.
Bobby, it's Mom. Please call me back. I'm getting worried about you.
He was an adult, but he did live at home, and this just wasn't like him.
Bobby Holder had a simple life.
He was a very easygoing person. 20 years old, entire life ahead of him.
Most people thought he was jovial and a good guy.
Currently between jobs, Bobby was living with his parents, but he was anything but idle.
He really enjoyed working with cars. It was a true passion of his.
And he was turning that passion into his main source of income.
I got rims if you need them. I can get you a set. How much money you got to spend?
He was into selling car parts, and he could do some repairs on vehicles.
In November of 2000, Bobby had been given the perfect gift for a car enthusiast.
It was Bobby's birthday, and he ended up receiving his most prized possession. It was a vintage car from the 80s. He was ecstatic.
But cars weren't Bobby's only interest.
He loved the ladies, and the ladies loved him.
You can go for a ride.
Okay, let's go.
Come on.
He would take his car out and drive up and down the popular streets.
Back in those days, it may sound strange today, but you could actually pick up the ladies if you're driving on the street and you kind of cruise and, hey, how you doing? You know? And I'm sure Bobby was that type.
There were two things that everyone knew about Bobby, is that he could fix your car and he would steal your girl.
There was no denying Bobby was a ladies' man, but he was also a father.
He did have a young baby with someone, and he also had a girlfriend that was kind of off and on. But for the most part, he was just doing his thing.
He just had this carefree and exuberant approach to life.
But now his future is uncertain.
Bobby?
On July 6, 2001, Bobby and his car mysteriously vanished.
And after 2 days without seeing or hearing from him, his mother's concern is turning to panic.
She just knew that something wasn't right, and she didn't have an explanation initially, but she had that gut feeling.
Hey!
So his mother began to reach out to his friends, girlfriends, even acquaintances, desperate for any information.
But no one could locate Bobby.
Meanwhile, 130 miles to the east in Chippewa County, Wisconsin, police have responded to a call of a possible dead body on the property of Elroy Leha.
The officials confirmed that what Elroy found was indeed a dismembered torso wrapped in trash bags. They believed that the individual was a male, approximately 25 to 35 years old.
But without fingerprints or dental records, it's the victim's skin that offers officials their most important clue in identifying the body.
Thankfully, there were a few tattoos. On his chest, he had LSP written on it.
Can we turn them over?
The word Scorpio was tattooed at the base of his neck, and there was a Native American chief tattooed on the stump of his right arm.
That's really all they have to go by are these 3 tattoos.
Except for one other mark on the body. One the police hope wasn't made while the victim was still alive.
In addition to the 3 tattoos that the detectives find on the torso, they do find a strange carving on his back.
Investigators suspect it's a message left by the killer.
Maybe this is gang related?
It actually reads, "Blood's rule."
In 2001, 20-year-old Bobby Holder was enjoying a carefree summer in St. Paul, Minnesota.
He loved hanging out with his friends. He loved working on cars.
He was a ladies' man. He'd see a nice-looking lady walking down the street, he would talk to her, and he wasn't shy about that.
But now, Bobby has been missing for several days.
Bobby still hadn't come home, and his mom was really worried at this point.
Bobby's mom made every effort and then some to find out where he might be.
But no one has any information until she gets a call from one of Bobby's friends, Phil Hamilton.
Bobby liked to work on cars, and he would sometimes buy and sell parts. He had a set of aftermarket wheel rims, the kind that people would use to customize their cars.
Phil Hamilton told Bobby's mom that he remembered Bobby was trying to sell his rims to a guy named Darnell.
Bobby and Darnell Smith had agreed on a price. And sometime later, Bobby told him he and their other friend Mo were going to meet up with Darnell on Lake Street in Minneapolis.
Well, what's that got to do with where he's at now?
He said that Darnell might have some more information. But Phil mentioned to Bobby's mother that she should tread lightly because he had just gotten out of prison.
Determined to speak to Darnell, Bobby's mother reaches out to her son's cell phone provider.
She was able to access the phone records, and she was able to narrow down a few phone numbers that she didn't know and start calling around.
Eventually, she finds what she's been looking for.
She calls a number listed on the log that turns out to be Darnell.
She confirms that he is the Darnell that Bobby sold the rims to.
I arranged the sale, but I didn't meet up with him. My girl picked him up.
Okay.
He hadn't heard or talked to him since.
With Darnell a dead end and her son still missing, Bobby's mother files a missing persons report on July 10th with the St. Paul police.
When Bobby's mom is talking to the police, she's giving them all the information, his height, his weight, and that he has some pretty distinct tattoos.
Yeah, he's got a Scorpio tattoo on his neck. He's got LSP written on his chest. And he has like a Chief Indian tattoo on his arm.
She gives them enough information that, God forbid they find a body, they can identify it.
When the report is shared to other jurisdictions, it's seen by the Sheriff's Department in Chippewa County, Wisconsin.
The Sheriff's Department was still trying to identify the dismembered torso found on Elroy Lejas' property.
And the tattoos of their John Doe clearly match the description in the missing persons report for Bobby Holder.
They're able to connect the dots that this is actually Bobby.
With their victim identified, the Chippewa County detective meets with Bobby's mother.
Chippewa County investigators had to do the difficult task of notifying the family of the deceased.
I'm so sorry for your loss, ma'am.
To say, hey, is this tattoo your son? That couldn't have been easy for police, but it had to be 1,000 times worse for her.
They have his body parts in a bag 100 miles to the east of where she lives. You can't even imagine how devastating, how crushing that would be.
Despite her shock and grief, Bobby's mother is able to confirm that the tattoos belong to her son.
In one of the most difficult moments of her life, Bobby's mother was able to identify him based off of the tattoos.
The detective then asks if it was possible that Bobby was involved in gang activity.
Once you join the gang, you're in that gang for life. You have to surrender blood to exit the gang. The situation could be fatal, and it appears that this might be an avenue that investigators might look at.
The killer had cut Blood's rule in the victim's back. However, Bobby's mother was adamant that her son was not involved in a gang.
Bobby's mom responded with a no. Bobby was a good kid.
She does admit, though, that Bobby sometimes smoked marijuana, and occasionally he even sold some.
Like a lot of 20-year-olds, he would sometimes make a little extra cash by selling pot to people that he knew. But that was hardly something that could lead to such a horrible crime.
But Bobby's mother tells the detective she recently learned something that might be important to the case.
The last activity that Bobby's mom could tell detectives for sure, and she had gathered that from a close friend, was that he was supposed to sell some car rims to a guy named Darnell.
And after filing the police report, she finally got in touch with a man who had gone with Bobby that night, his friend, Mo.
He'd said when he and Bobby delivered the rims, they didn't meet with Darnell, just his girlfriend.
And Mo thinks he might have had more than business on his mind.
He was a true ladies' man.
Meeting with Darnell's girlfriend without Darnell, he definitely would have been flirting.
She wondered if that might have upset Darnell.
The dismembered torso of Bobby Holder has been found dumped in Chippewa County, Wisconsin. And his mother has told police that shortly before he disappeared, he may have been flirting with another man's girlfriend.
Knowing her son being the flirty ladies' man, she's not sure, but she wouldn't put it past him.
Bobby had sold a set of wheel rims to a man named Darnell Smith. But when he and his friend Mo delivered the rims, they didn't meet with Darnell, just his girlfriend.
And Mo had told Bobby's mother that this meeting may have sparked the motive behind Bobby's disappearance.
Detectives now want to speak to Mo. They want to figure out what went down during that transaction.
But before police can track down Mo, Bobby's car is found.
One of Bobby's friends spotted his car in a parking lot about 40 miles east of St. Paul in Baldwin, Wisconsin, and called his mother.
After Bobby's parents retrieve their son's car, an investigator tracks down Mo Jones.
Bobby and Mo had met in summer school, known each other about 4 years.
When asked about the night Bobby sold the rims to Darnell, Mo said it all started when they were hanging out at another friend's house.
While hanging out with his friends, Bobby did step away to take a phone call.
When he came back, he told Mo that somebody wanted to buy his rims. He was excited, but a little hesitant because of who wanted to buy the rims.
He said it was Darnell.
That's Darnell Smith.
Yeah, they call him Tequila, like a street name.
Okay.
Bobby knew he had just gotten out of jail, and he was a little nervous because he had a reputation.
Still, a meeting was arranged, but with Darnell's girlfriend Tina instead of Darnell.
On the way to the meeting, Bobby gave Mo the impression that he was interested in more than just selling the rims.
Hey, you know Darnell's girl?
Nope.
Man, she is something special.
Bobby's ladies' man self is just telling Mo like she's pretty cute.
She surely piqued his interest.
At the meetup, things went smoothly. At first.
Hey, you Bobby?
Yeah, that's me. Nice to meet you.
You too.
Heard a lot about you.
Oh, what'd you hear?
None but good things.
But as they were talking, Tina got a call from Darnell.
Hello?
Darnell called to make sure. She inspected the rims to make sure nothing was wrong with them.
And Bobby didn't like that.
When Bobby heard this, he got offended.
Let me talk to him.
Yeah, let's talk to you.
Bobby got on the phone to talk directly to Darnell.
What you think, I'm trying to play you? Come on, man. You're not gonna find any rims like this. Not for no $800. It's not even a scratch on them.
Apparently, Darnell thought the price included installation.
Look, that's not what we agreed on.
So what happened?
Bobby said he'd do it, but he didn't have the right tools on him.
He's telling Mo how he needs to go pick up a few materials because he is going to install the rims.
Even though this was a week before Bobby disappeared, the detective suspects there's a connection.
So police, they start to look into Darnell.
He does have a criminal history, and it's extensive.
He was a registered sex offender for assaulting a 12-year-old, and he had just got out of jail.
Darnell's probation officer is able to shed more light on what the arrest record suggests.
The detective speaks to Darnell's parole officer, and they find out a lot of information about him, especially about his emotional intelligence.
Darnell is a very self-centered person, and he really only cared about himself.
Darnell was known to have an incredibly violent streak. He was known to have a very short temper.
He's prone to lashing out, temper tantrums when he doesn't have his way.
Does that mean Darnell is capable of murder?
Detectives feel like even though they did have that heated exchange over the phone about price and installation, was that really enough of a motive to kill and dismember this man like that?
But their doubts are dispelled when the probation officer mentions Darnell's girlfriend.
Crime novelists often talk about that aha moment that police get. You go, whoa, what do I have here?
The parole officer tells detectives that Darnell's girlfriend's name is Tina Leha.
Tina's last name was the same last name as the man who discovered Bobby's remains.
What are the chances that the two aren't connected?
A detective investigating the murder of Bobby Holder has just uncovered information about Darnell Smith's girlfriend, Tina, that may prove crucial to the investigation.
Her last name is Leha. They put together the fact that, wait a minute, Bobby's body was discovered by a guy named Leha in Wisconsin.
It turns out to be no coincidence. Elroy Leha is Tina's father.
Does this prove that she was involved in Bobby's murder?
And was Darnell?
He was recently released from prison for sexually assaulting a 12-year-old girl.
Darnell was known to have an incredibly violent streak. He was known to have a very short temper. He was just a violent person.
Looking for answers, the investigator takes a closer look at Tina Leha.
Tina was this all-American student that people looked up to.
She was a girl that had big dreams.
One of her dreams was a career where she could help others.
She went to college to become a social worker.
She wanted to help and give back to the Native American community.
Unfortunately, her dream was derailed by financial problems.
Tina left college and had to get a job. She took the first opportunity that presented itself, and she became a corrections officer at Stillwater Correctional Facility.
But then Tina crossed a line.
Shortly after Tina was hired as a corrections officer, she met Darnell Smith. And as a correction officer and he as a prisoner, they started a very taboo relationship.
I bet you look fine underneath that uniform.
They're with each other for 8 hours or 12 hours a day. They get closer and closer. Before you know it, you have a relationship.
The relationship led to her doing things that she normally wouldn't have done.
Tina started smuggling in drugs and other contraband, even nude photos of herself for Darnell.
Eventually, the nude photos came to the attention of other prison employees.
Darnell had been showing them to other inmates, even letting them borrow the photos.
After an official investigation into her conduct, Tina was fired. But that wasn't the end of their relationship.
She then got herself placed on his visitors list to go see him at the jail that she once worked at.
It's like, at this point, I've already lost my job. So I might as well stay, because what else? Everybody in the community already knows.
Police are almost certain Darnell and Tina are connected to Bobby's murder. But they're still lacking hard evidence that ties them to the crime.
Everything they have is completely circumstantial.
Detectives are kind of at a loss until they receive a phone call.
The caller is Darnell's younger brother, Ramon Smith.
Now they have a new person, Ramon, who might just add another layer of information to the investigation.
And he agrees to come in for an interview.
Ramon is pretty transparent with police. He knows about what happened to Bobby.
Ramon tells the investigators that on July 5th, Darnell comes to him asking him to fight Bobby with him and their brother Shaka.
Did you do it?
No, sir. No way. I did not want to be a part of that.
The next day, when Ramon asked Darnell what ended up happening with Bobby, Darnell told him that Bobby had never shown up.
But Ramon suspects Darnell was lying.
A few days go by after that original conversation. He notices that his brothers and Darnell's girlfriend, Tina, all seem really strange and jumpy.
Ramon knew something wasn't right.
His suspicions were confirmed a few days later, when Darnell asked him to come over to his house.
While they were sitting on the steps, Darnell tells Ramon what really happened. He tells him that he had Tina call Bobby over to the apartment.
Get him over here now.
Come on.
Darnell said he had it, and he was going to make sure that Bobby never flirted with his girlfriend again.
Tina told Bobby that Darnell would not be home.
Would you want to come over tonight? No, he won't be here for hours.
But Tina wasn't alone at the house.
Darnell was there with his brother Shaka, waiting for Bobby to come over.
Darnell beats him senseless.
Darnell and Shaka not only beat him up, but they killed him.
Ramon Smith has just told police that his brother Darnell confessed to him that he murdered 20-year-old Bobby Holder.
He's taken aback that his brother really was involved.
Ramon explains that after Bobby was dead, Darnell and Shaka had cut up the body.
He had a small hatchet, 2 knives, and a box cutter, and that it took him 5.5 hours.
Ramon tells the detectives that Darnell and Shaka then called a neighbor to come over, and that neighbor came to help dispose of the body.
The neighbor's name is Andre Parker.
And then he had Andre and Tina get rid of the body parts.
It was his understanding that they had taken the dismembered body and dumped it out in the country.
Do you know the whereabouts of Shaka at this time?
He's at work in St. Paul.
After interviewing Ramon, police pick up Shaka at the restaurant where he works and bring him down to the station.
When the detective sat down with him in the interrogation room and told him that he was under arrest for his part in the murder of Bobby Holder, he denied knowing anything about it.
You really don't know what this is about? No, I don't.
But when the detective pressures him, his story changes.
It's not long before he just folds and confesses everything.
My brother, Tequila, and Shaka were in the kitchen, and Bobby had came in. And so we're all in the house. So it's you, Darnell, and Tina in the house. Right.
The weight of knowing that I have participated in a crime such as this, the only way to get the relief is to confess and tell it all.
Shaka admits that Darnell killed Bobby.
Shaka tells detectives that his main motive was that Bobby was trying to get with his girl.
He said, but see, he's been calling my girlfriend trying to get her. So I'm like, what do you mean? You're just like trying to go out with her.
Someone liked his girlfriend and he didn't like it, and he took matters into his own hands.
Shaka thought Darnell was just going to give Bobby a beatdown.
According to Shaka, Darnell got Tina to arrange for Bobby to come over to see her.
He liked her, so she knew that he would probably take her up on that offer of coming over.
She was like baked, I would say.
Shaka tells detectives Darnell has everything orchestrated. He has Shaka be the lookout when Bobby arrives to make sure he arrives alone.
He said, Shaka, when did you go out and look out and see if anybody's home? If there's any one of his homeboys, whatever. I was like, okay, whatever. And so, as soon as I did that, I came back and I was like, nobody's there.
After getting the all clear from Shaka, Darnell sets his plan in motion.
Darnell begins to attack him with a heavy flashlight and is bludgeoning him over and over again.
Bobby is pleading with him. He's asking him to stop. He's confused. He's scared. He's not understanding why this is going on.
He's apologizing for anything he may have done.
Come on, man, please. Yeah, what's up now? Ladies, man.
He then brandishes a gun.
Darnell, please, man, why you doing this, man? You know why you here.
Then Darnell pulled the trigger.
I was standing there. I got hit with blood, and I backed up, started flipping out, moving back and forth. Like I kept saying, I can't take this. I can't take this.
But Bobby was still alive.
At this point, Bobby is begging for his life.
He said, I'm having trouble breathing. He said, let me get up and take myself to the hospital. When he said that, my brother said, no, you ain't doing that because then you're going to go to the cop.
Shaka said that Darnell then fired a second shot, killing Bobby.
The blood was like all over the floor. And he's like, Shaka, help me clean this up. I was like, I'm not helping you clean this up. I'm sorry.
But Shaka admits he didn't leave.
You don't leave because you're kind of afraid of your brother.
So Darnell dragged the body into the basement alone.
Shaka told investigators that he eventually went down to the basement to see what Darnell was doing. Darnell had a small hatchet in his hand.
He said, look at this, and he was decapitating Bobby's head from his shoulder. My son couldn't take it, so I threw up.
He cuts off his arms, his legs.
That level of violence and savagery is unimaginable.
He did one of the sickest things anybody could do what he shouldn't do to him. Like, I ain't doing anybody in the studio or the fire.
All that was left to do was to get rid of the pieces. But Darnell had a plan for that, too.
Is there anybody else who has knowledge of or was involved in this murder and dismemberment?
There is one person that was involved. He wasn't really involved until like the last stages of it, but his name is Andre.
After booking Shaka on murder charges, police arrest Andre Parker.
Andre told the police basically everything that he knew.
You have no problem talking about this murder, correct? Correct?
No problem. No, I ain't had nothing to do with that boy's death.
I'm sure having the opportunity to finally confess was a relief for Andre. He had an opportunity to finally remove the guilt that was associated with being a part of this.
Andre says that he'd stopped by for a visit when Darnell asked him to come down to the basement.
He puts one hand on your shoulder. He said, I want to show you something.
And what he showed him was horrifying.
The dismembered body was already cut up and put in bags, and he needed someone else to help drive the cars and dispose the body parts.
Andre felt trapped, like he had no way to say no to being involved.
Who said that?
Andre essentially admitted that him and Tina did the dirty work, disposing of the body while driving along the highway, getting rid of the different limbs.
He said that Tina was the one who knew where they were going. He was just following directions. If they wanted more information, they needed to talk to Tina.
And they need to do it soon.
He told the detectives that they need to find Tina and find her fast. Because if Darnell could do this to Bobby, he knows that Tina's life might be in danger.
She's in danger today. She meant that.
Detectives have arrested 2 people involved in the murder of Bobby Holder. Darnell Smith's brother, Shaka, and Darnell's neighbor, Andre Parker.
And now police have a manhunt to embark on.
Darnell himself, who fired the shot that killed Bobby, has disappeared, along with his girlfriend, Tina Leha.
At this point, they're nowhere to be found.
They are trying to find Tina and Darnell before they possibly hurt someone else.
Or before Darnell hurts Tina.
Andre Parker told detectives that Tina was in danger being involved with Darnell.
Andre also believes Darnell will kill him for talking to the police. Police spend days tracking down Darnell's friends and associates.
Detectives were talking to everyone connected to him, looking for information on his whereabouts, but no one had a lead on him.
The manhunt spins its wheels until August 2nd.
They find out that Darnell and Tina were taken into custody by authorities in a small town of Glendora, Mississippi.
The detective travels to Mississippi to question them.
Detectives speak to both Darnell and Tina, but neither one of them will speak, and they both ask for legal representation.
The couple is brought back to Minnesota, where the district attorney offers Tina a way to help herself.
She's offered a plea. The plea will have her serving probably 6 years of time.
She turns it down. She's sticking with Darnell.
Unlike Tina, Andre Parker accepts the prosecutor's offer of a deal.
Andre pled guilty to aiding an offender and was sentenced to 4 years in prison.
Darnell's brother Shaka also takes a plea deal.
He takes a lesser sentence, but it's still 20 years for murder.
There's really no telling why he kind of went along with what Darnell had asked him to do. Maybe he was afraid of him, even though they're siblings.
Anyone who would go to the extent of dismembering a body should be feared.
Maybe he wanted to impress him. Maybe he didn't feel like he had a choice.
Whether Tina Leha willingly chose to help Darnell is the main issue when she goes on trial in January of 2002.
The prosecutor didn't claim that Tina knew Darnell Smith was going to murder Bobby Holder.
While he had more than likely a plan in his mind about what he wanted to do upon meeting Bobby, he didn't convey that to Tina.
But the prosecution maintained she at least knew that Bobby was going to be assaulted.
This was a premeditated plan between her and Darnell. If it wasn't for Tina luring Bobby to the scene, Bobby would still be alive today.
The defense admits what Tina did, but she takes the stand to explain why she did it.
While she was on the stand, she pleaded and she cried that she went along with what Darnell said because she was afraid. She was afraid for her own life.
Tina claims that she left Bobby's body on her father's land to leave a trail for the police.
The only way she thought to get any degree of help was by doing an intentionally poor job of concealing the deceased body.
Tina says she needed help getting free of Darnell.
Like, if I knew better, I would have done better. And now I know, and unfortunately it's too late.
She tries to use some tears to sway the jury, but ultimately they see through it. They see the evidence that's laid out, and they find her guilty of second-degree murder.
She's still awaiting sentencing when Darnell Smith goes on trial a month later.
The prosecutor told the jury that there was never any doubt in Darnell's mind about what he was going to do to Bobby Holder for flirting with Tina.
Darnell was not going to be disrespected by somebody trying to take his girl.
It was premeditated, calculated steps, very intentional steps to end this man's life.
The jury reaches a decision after only one day of deliberations.
The jury has no problem in finding him guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Bobby.
He receives the maximum sentence possible.
Darnell was sentenced to life without parole.
It's justice for Bobby Holder and for all the other lives Darnell ruined.
He didn't care about harming someone and the impact that that would have to that person, Bobby's family, and then, of course, the people around him that he had involved in the situation,
including his girlfriend.
Tina is sentenced a few days later, and the judge sentenced her to 17 and a half years. While Tina portrayed herself as a victim, the judge told her the only victim here was Bobby Holder.
But for Tina, that isn't the final word.
Even after a person is convicted of a crime, they have an opportunity to appeal the verdict. In this case, Tina appealed her verdict, and her sentencing was reduced.
17 years got reduced to 12. I believe she's out today.
For families of the victims, this can be disheartening, and sometimes it can just be shattering for families that are trying to recover from the death of their loved one.
Of course, they can never fully move past what was done to the young man they loved.
Bobby's mother, she now has to live and die with the thoughts of her son forever. That's her legacy. That's it for her. Her holidays are not the same. Her life is different. Tina gets her life over. Jaka gets their life over. They all get to continue their lives, but Bobby didn't get to live his life.
And his life was taken for no reason.
Bobby Holder was a young man with his whole life ahead of him. 20 years old, attractive, doing positive things, happy in his own way. And his life was just cut short by a man unable to control his actions. It was just senseless.
There are moments in criminal investigations that become permanently etched into a nation's memory. Not because investigators uncovered an ingenious clue or because a suspect confessed under dramatic circumstances. but because a single, unexpected discovery transformed what appeared to be an ordinary night into one of the darkest chapters in modern criminal history. For Italy, one such moment unfolded on a quiet street in Rome, where a routine police patrol encountered something so improbable that it would continue to haunt public memory for decades. It did not begin with flashing lights or a frantic emergency call. It began with an almost imperceptible sound, a faint, irregular knocking coming from the trunk of a parked Fiat on Viale Pola. At first, the officers could not know whether the noise was mechanical, accidental, or something far more alarming. They approached the vehicle with caution, listening carefully as the sound came again, weak enough to be missed by anyone who was not paying close attention. When they opened the trunk, they were confronted with a scene that would soon become one of the most recognizable crime discoveries in Italian history. Inside lay two young women. One, 19-year-old Rosaria Lopez, was already dead. Beside her was 17-year-old Donatella Colasani, covered in blood, gravely injured, and barely clinging to life. She had somehow survived what her attackers believed no one possibly could. Her survival was extraordinary. It was also the single reason the truth behind the crime would be reconstructed with remarkable clarity. Without her, investigators might have been left with a body, an abandoned car, and countless unanswered questions. Instead, they found a witness whose testimony would expose not only the identities of those responsible, but also the horrifying sequence of events that had taken place over the previous 36 hours. The discovery shocked Italy immediately. Newspapers reported on the brutality of the crime. Television broadcasts repeated the story for days. Public outrage spread rapidly, fueled not only by the extreme violence inflicted upon the victims, but also by the identities of the perpetrators. This was not a story about organized crime or anonymous criminals operating from the margins of society. The men accused of committing these acts came from wealthy Roman families. They had enjoyed opportunities unavailable to many others. They had not grown up in poverty or social isolation. Instead, they belonged to a privileged environment that, in the eyes of many observers, should have offered every chance for a lawful future. Yet privilege alone had not prevented violence, nor had earlier encounters with the justice system prevented further escalation. At the center of the case stood Angelo Izzo, a young man born in Rome on August 23, 1955. By the time he participated in the events that would become known as the Cercio Massacre in September 1975, he was already familiar with the criminal justice system. His record included armed robbery, assaults, and sexual violence. Previous convictions had resulted in punishment, but he had also benefited from sentence reductions and acts of clemency before the crimes that would forever define his name. Those earlier opportunities to change course did not stop the progression toward greater brutality. Instead, they became part of a larger question that would shadow the case for decades. When should society believe that a violent offender has truly changed? The investigation that followed the discovery on Viale Pola appeared, first, to offer a sense of certainty. Donatella Colasani survived. She identified the attackers. Angelo Izzo and Johnny Guido were arrested. Their accomplice, Andrea Gaira, fled Italy and remained a fugitive for years before later being identified through DNA after his death. The legal proceedings moved forward. In 1976, all three men were sentenced to life imprisonment without mitigating circumstances. Many believed justice had been served. The case itself became a symbol of violence against women in Italy. While women's rights organizations participated in the proceedings as civil parties, ensuring that the broader social implications of the crime would not be ignored. As years passed, however, public attention inevitably shifted elsewhere. Italy changed. New generations grew up knowing the Cercio massacre primarily through documentaries. Newspaper archives and discussions in criminology courses. Inside prison walls, Angelo Izzo appeared to present the image of an inmate moving toward rehabilitation. He wrote extensively. He pursued educational activities. His conduct created an impression, at least within parts of the correctional system, that decades of imprisonment had achieved their intended purpose. Yet not everyone accepted that conclusion. Psychological evaluations continued to raise concerns. According to those assessments, Izzo displayed manipulative tendencies, a lack of empathy, and a significant risk of committing violent crimes again. These warnings existed alongside a justice system increasingly willing to consider rehabilitation as an essential principle rather than a distant ideal. The debate was not unique to Italy. Across many democratic societies, courts and correctional institutions wrestled with the same difficult question. Could someone responsible for extreme violence eventually become safe enough to rejoin society, even under supervision? Or were there offenders whose history demonstrated that the danger never truly disappeared? Those questions remained largely theoretical until late 2004, when Angelo Izzo was granted semi-liberty. After nearly 30 years in prison, he was permitted to leave during the daytime for work before returning to custody each evening. On paper, the arrangement reflected confidence in a structured process of reintegration. In practice, it would soon become one of the most controversial decisions in modern Italian criminal justice. Less than a year later, on April 28, 2005, while benefiting from that very measure, Izzo committed another double murder. The victims were Maria Carmela Linciano and her 14-year-old daughter, Valentina Marano. Both were tied up, suffocated with plastic bags, and buried in the garden of a house near Ferrazzano. Their bodies were eventually recovered after accomplices cooperated with investigators. Once again, Italy found itself confronting the same name that had horrified the country 3 decades earlier. Once again, families were mourning loved ones whose lives had been taken through acts of calculated violence. This second crime transformed the Angelo Izzo case from an infamous historical tragedy into something even more unsettling. It was no longer only a story about one exceptionally brutal crime committed in youth. It became a story about what happens after conviction, about whether punishment alone guarantees change, about the enormous responsibility carried by those who assess risk, recommend rehabilitation, and decide when someone should be trusted with freedom, however limited that freedom may be. The questions raised by the case extended far beyond one individual. They touched on the very purpose of imprisonment itself. Is prison intended solely to punish? Should also rehabilitate? If rehabilitation is the goal, how can anyone confidently distinguish genuine transformation from manipulation? What happens when optimism proves disastrously misplaced? These questions do not have simple answers, and the Angelo Izzo case offers no comforting resolution. Instead, it presents a chronology of documented events that continue to be examined by criminologists, psychologists, legal scholars, and historians alike. It is a case studied not because it provides certainty, but because it exposes the difficult intersection of justice, public safety, and human judgment. Over the course of this story, we will follow those events exactly as they unfolded through the available facts. We will examine the background of the 3 perpetrators, the lives of the young women whose ordinary day ended in unimaginable violence, the investigation made possible by an extraordinary act of survival, the courtroom proceedings that followed, and the decisions that decades later allowed one convicted murderer back into society, long enough to kill again. Above all, this is not the story of Angelo Izzo as a central figure deserving fascination. It is the story of lives forever altered by his actions and of a justice system forced to confront one of its most painful failures. The faint knocking from the trunk of that abandoned Fiat on Viale Pola did more than reveal a crime. It marked the beginning of a case that would challenge Italy's understanding of violence, accountability, and the limits of rehabilitation for generations to come. Long before the names Angelo Izzo, Johnny Guido, and Andrea Gaira became permanently associated with one of Italy's most infamous criminal cases, they were simply three young men growing up in Rome. They did not emerge from environments typically associated with chronic deprivation or social exclusion. Instead, they belonged to affluent families, enjoying advantages that many young Italians of their generation could only imagine. Their backgrounds would later become an uncomfortable element of the public discussion because they challenged a common assumption that horrific violence is born primarily from poverty or desperation. In this case, the available facts pointed elsewhere. The men responsible came from privilege, education, and financial security, making the crimes even more difficult for the public to comprehend. Among them, Angelo Izzo would become the central figure whose actions continued to influence Italian criminal justice decades after the original case. Born on August 23, 1955, in Rome, Izzo grew up in circumstances that offered opportunities rather than obstacles. As a young man, he enrolled in medical school, suggesting a future that might have led toward a respected profession. Yet he abandoned those studies before completing them. While his formal education came to an end, another pattern had already begun to emerge, one that would become increasingly visible through repeated encounters with the criminal justice system. By his teenage years, Izzo had already accumulated a history of violent criminal behavior. His record before 1975 included armed robbery, physical assaults, and multiple acts of sexual violence. These were not isolated incidents committed in a brief period of youthful recklessness. Instead, they reflected an escalating pattern of offending that repeatedly brought him into conflict with the law. Courts had already imposed convictions against him. Yet those convictions did not remove him permanently from society. Like many offenders within the legal system, he benefited from sentence reductions and acts of clemency that allowed him to avoid serving the entirety of earlier punishments. At the time, these decisions reflected legal mechanisms available within the Italian justice system. They were not unusual in themselves. Only after the events of 1975 would many observers look back and question whether those earlier opportunities had underestimated the danger he posed. The available evidence also places Izzo within a social circle that shared similar attitudes and behavior. He frequently associated with Johnny Guido and Andrea Gaira, two young men who likewise came from affluent Roman families. The three spent time together in the Perioli district of Rome, one of the city's wealthier neighborhoods. Their background did not distinguish them from countless other privileged young people, but their conduct did. According to the documented information surrounding the case, they embraced extremist right-wing ideas, regarded themselves as socially superior, and displayed contempt toward people they considered beneath them, particularly women from working-class backgrounds. These attitudes were reflected not merely in words, but in repeated acts of violence. Their sense of superiority became one of the defining themes discussed after the case entered the public consciousness. Rather than seeing other people as equals deserving dignity and respect, the three men behaved as though power entitled them to domination. That perception would ultimately have devastating consequences. Yet, while much public attention naturally focused on the perpetrators, the heart of the story belongs elsewhere. Every true crime case begins with victims whose lives existed long before they became names in newspaper headlines. Their identities deserve to be understood independently of the crimes committed against them. In September 1975, Donatella Colasani was only 17 years old. Rosaria Lopez was 19. Both came from ordinary working-class families in Rome. Nothing in the available records suggests that either young woman sought danger or anticipated becoming involved with violent offenders. They were not participants in organized crime, nor were they connected to the criminal world inhabited by the three men who would later attack them. They were simply two young women whose paths crossed with individuals capable of extraordinary violence. Their youth is impossible to ignore. At 17 and 19 years old, they stood at the beginning of adulthood, an age often marked by plans for the future, growing independence, and the gradual transition from adolescence into the responsibilities of adult life. Those possibilities would never be realized for Rosaria Lopez. Donatella Colasani would survive, but survival itself would come at an unimaginable physical and emotional cost. Because the surviving evidence focuses primarily on the criminal investigation, relatively little personal information about their daily lives appears within the documented facts provided here. That absence itself serves as a reminder of a recurring feature in many criminal cases. Public memory often preserves extensive detail about offenders while leaving comparatively little space for the ordinary lives interrupted by violence. Yet what is known is sufficient to establish an essential truth. Donatella and Rosaria were ordinary young women from modest backgrounds. They did not enter the events of late September 1975 expecting tragedy. According to the established account, Izzo and Guido approached the two young women with what appeared to be a simple invitation to attend a party. There was nothing in that invitation, as documented, that suggested the extraordinary violence that would follow. Invitations to social gatherings are among the most ordinary interactions between young people. Accepting one ordinarily requires trust that those extending the invitation intend no harm. It is precisely because the invitation appeared ordinary that the subsequent betrayal became so shocking. Rather than taking the young women to a party, Izzo and Guido drove them to a villa owned by the family of Andrea Guerra in San Felice Urcio, a coastal town south of Rome. The location itself would later become inseparable from the case, giving rise to the name by which the crime is now remembered, the Curcio Massacre. Upon arrival, Andrea Guerra joined the group. The villa, isolated from immediate public attention, became the setting for the events that followed. According to the established sequence, once everyone was inside, the doors were locked. That simple action marked a decisive transition. What had begun under the appearance of a social invitation became a situation from which the victims could no longer freely leave. Looking back, investigators and the public would see that moment as the point where ordinary expectations ended and prolonged captivity began. Understanding the backgrounds of the perpetrators and the victims is essential because the contrast between them shaped much of Italy's reaction. On one side stood three young men raised amid comfort, wealth, and opportunity. On the other stood two young women from working-class families who accepted what they believed to be an invitation to an ordinary social gathering. The difference in economic background became an important aspect of public discussion after the trial. The offenders' own documented attitudes, seeing themselves as members of a superior social class, while looking down upon poorer people, gave the crimes an additional symbolic dimension. The violence was not committed in isolation from those beliefs. Instead, the case became widely understood as reflecting a broader abuse of power rooted in entitlement and contempt. Yet it is equally important not to reduce the victims solely to symbols within a social debate. Donatella Colasani and Rosaria Lopez were individuals whose lives mattered independent of any political or cultural significance later attached to the case. One would survive through extraordinary circumstances and become the principal witness whose testimony made justice possible. The other would lose her life before reaching her 20th birthday. Both deserve to be remembered first as young women whose trust was exploited by those who chose Deception over humanity. Before the first act of violence occurred, before investigators collected evidence, before courtrooms filled with journalists and observers, there was only a car traveling from Rome toward San Felice Curcio. Inside were 3 young men and 2 young women. The destination was presented as a place for an evening gathering. Instead, it led to a secluded villa where the victims would be isolated from the outside world. As the vehicle moved farther away from the city, there was no visible indication of the suffering that awaited. The journey itself appeared ordinary. Its true significance would become clear only after one of Italy's most notorious criminals. Investigations began reconstructing every step that had taken place beyond those locked doors. In the next stage of the story, the ordinary promise of a party would give way to approximately 36 hours of captivity, brutality, and violence. Events that would permanently alter the lives of everyone connected to the case and leave an enduring mark on the history of Italian criminal justice. The discovery on Viale Pola marked the end of one tragedy and the beginning of another process, one that would determine whether those responsible could be identified, arrested, and brought before a court of law. Criminal investigations often begin with uncertainty, forcing detectives to reconstruct events from fragments of physical evidence, conflicting witness statements, and timelines that grow more complicated with every passing hour. In many homicide cases, the victim cannot speak, leaving investigators to rely almost entirely on forensic findings and circumstantial evidence. The Curcio case unfolded differently. Although one victim, Rosaria Lopez, had died, the other, Donatella Colasanti, remained alive. Her survival was nothing short of extraordinary. It also transformed the investigation from one built primarily upon physical evidence into one guided by the testimony of the only person who had witnessed the crime from beginning to end. As Donatella received urgent medical treatment for the severe injuries she had suffered, investigators understood that her condition was critical. Before any formal statement could be taken, doctors focused on preserving her life. Every hour mattered. Every medical intervention increased the possibility that the investigation would gain access to the one account capable of explaining what had happened inside the villa at San Felice Curcio. The police already knew the discovery itself was unusual. 2 young women had been placed together inside the trunk of a Fiat. One was dead. The other had somehow survived despite injuries so severe that her attackers had apparently believed she was no longer alive. The deliberate placement of both victims inside the vehicle strongly suggested an attempt to dispose of what the perpetrators assumed would be 2 bodies. Yet that assumption proved fatally mistaken for them. Donatella's survival ensured that the crime could no longer remain hidden behind speculation. When her medical condition allowed investigators to speak with her, she recounted the events she had endured. According to the information she provided, what had begun as an invitation to a party had instead become prolonged captivity inside a secluded villa. She identified the 3 men responsible: Angelo Izzo, Johnny Guido, and Andrea Guerra. Her testimony established the sequence investigators needed. It explained why the victims had traveled to San Felice Curcio, identified the location where the crimes had occurred, and named the individuals involved. In many criminal investigations, eyewitness testimony must be treated cautiously, particularly when a witness has experienced severe trauma. Investigators are trained to corroborate statements whenever possible rather than relying upon memory alone. In this case, however, Donatella's account became the essential framework around which the investigation developed. She had survived the ordeal that Rosaria Lopez had not. Her ability to identify the perpetrators immediately gave investigators a clear direction, rather than searching through an endless list of unknown suspects. Police now possessed specific names connected directly to the crimes. The importance of her testimony cannot be overstated. Without it, detectives would almost certainly have faced a far more difficult investigation. An abandoned vehicle containing one deceased victim and one unidentified survivor would have presented countless unanswered questions, establishing where the women had last been seen, reconstructing their movements, and identifying everyone they had encountered would have required extensive investigative work. Instead, Donatella's statement significantly shortened that process. The focus shifted from discovering who might have committed the crimes to locating the individuals she had identified. Acting upon her testimony, law enforcement moved quickly. Angelo Izzo was arrested. Johnny Guido was also taken into custody. Their arrests represented a decisive step in the investigation, preventing the two men from remaining at liberty while authorities continued gathering evidence. The speed with which investigators acted reflected both the seriousness of the crimes and the credibility of the surviving witnesses' account. Yet one suspect remained beyond their immediate reach. Andrea Guerra did not remain in Italy to face the investigation. Instead, he fled the country, escaping before authorities could arrest him alongside his accomplices. His disappearance introduced a new challenge. While Izzo and Guido would proceed through the Italian justice system, Guerra became a fugitive. For years, his whereabouts remained uncertain. According to the documented history of the case, he lived under a false identity outside Italy. Only much later, after his death, was his identity definitively confirmed through DNA analysis, although that confirmation occurred years after the original investigation. It ultimately resolved one of the lingering uncertainties surrounding the case by establishing that the fugitive had indeed been the same Andrea Guerra sought in connection with the Cercio massacre. As detectives reconstructed the events described by Donatella, the investigation increasingly demonstrated the value of a surviving eyewitness. Her testimony did more than identify the perpetrators. It also established the chronology of the crimes, beginning with the deceptive invitation, continuing through the victim's arrival at the villa, and concluding with the attempt to dispose of both women by placing them inside the trunk of the Fiat before abandoning the vehicle in Rome. Each stage contributed to a coherent narrative supported by the physical circumstances already observed by investigators. The abandoned car, the location where the victims were found, and the condition in which Donatella and Rosaria had been discovered all aligned with the account she provided. Importantly, the available factual record does not require speculation regarding complex forensic techniques or elaborate physical evidence. The central strength of the prosecution's case rested upon the combination of Donatella's survival and her direct identification of the three men responsible. Her account became the foundation upon which investigators built the criminal case. While every homicide investigation seeks objective evidence wherever possible, the presence of a surviving victim capable of identifying her attackers fundamentally altered the trajectory of the inquiry. Public attention intensified as news of the investigation spread across Italy. The circumstances surrounding the crime had already generated widespread shock. Now the identities of those accused further deepened public concern. The revelation that the suspects came from affluent Roman families challenged conventional assumptions about violent crime. Newspapers closely followed developments in the investigation. While many Italians struggled to understand how individuals from privileged backgrounds had become associated with such extraordinary brutality, the investigation therefore unfolded under intense public scrutiny. Every confirmed fact carried significance not only for prosecutors preparing their case, but also for a society attempting to make sense of what had occurred. Throughout this period, Donatella Colasani occupied a unique and profoundly difficult position. She was simultaneously a survivor, a victim, and a principal witness. The criminal justice system depended upon her ability to recount experiences that no one should ever have to relive. Each statement she provided helped establish accountability. Yet each recollection necessarily required revisiting the trauma she had endured. This difficult balance exists in many serious criminal investigations involving surviving victims. Their testimony becomes indispensable to justice while also demanding remarkable emotional strength. Donatella's willingness to identify the perpetrators ensured that Rosaria Lopez's death would not remain an unsolved homicide. It also ensured that the crimes committed against both young women would be presented before court, with the clarity that only a surviving eyewitness could provide. As investigators completed their work, the path toward prosecution became increasingly direct. Angelo Izzo and Johnny Guido had been arrested. Andrea Guerra had fled. The events inside the villa had been reconstructed through Donatella's testimony. The discovery on Viale Pola, initially an inexplicable scene involving two young women hidden inside the trunk of an abandoned car, had evolved into one of the most thoroughly understood criminal cases of its era. Yet the investigation itself represented only the beginning of the legal process. Detectives could identify suspects and collect evidence, but questions of guilt, punishment, and justice ultimately belonged to the courts. The next chapter would move from police investigation to public trial, where the evidence assembled by investigators, together with Donatella Colasanni's testimony, would be examined before judges. It was there that Italy would witness not only the prosecution of Angelo Izzo, Johnny Guido, and Andrea Guerra, but also the emergence of a case that would become a lasting symbol of violence against women and a defining moment in the country's modern criminal history. The work of investigators had brought Angelo Izzo and Johnny Guido into custody, while Andrea Guerra had fled Italy before he could be arrested. The testimony of Donatella Colasanni had provided investigators with a detailed account of what had taken place, transforming a horrifying discovery on Viale Pola into a criminal case supported by the only surviving eyewitness. Yet in every justice system, an investigation is only one stage of the process. The responsibility for determining guilt, imposing punishment, and delivering justice ultimately rests with the courts. By the time the case entered the courtroom in 1976, it had already become one of the most closely watched criminal proceedings in Italy. Public attention was immense, and journalists followed every development. The brutality of the crimes had shocked the country, but so too had the backgrounds of the defendants. The image of three young men from wealthy Roman families standing trial for crimes of such extraordinary violence challenged many assumptions about privilege, responsibility, and criminal behavior. For the families of the victims, however, the public debate could never overshadow the deeply personal loss at the center of the proceedings. Rosaria Lopez would never have the opportunity to tell her own story. Her voice had been permanently silenced. Donatella Colasanni entered the courtroom carrying a burden unlike that of any other witness. She had survived the crimes that had claimed her friend's life, and now she was asked to revisit those memories in the pursuit of justice. Survivors who testify in violent criminal cases often become the central link between the crime itself and the legal process that follows. Their testimony is not simply another piece of evidence. It becomes the human narrative that explains how the crime unfolded. In this case, Donatella's account remained fundamental to the prosecution. Her survival had allowed investigators to identify the perpetrators quickly, and her testimony now enabled the court to examine the sequence of events through the perspective of the only person who had lived through them. The proceedings were not merely about determining whether a crime had occurred. That question had already been answered by the overwhelming evidence surrounding the deaths of Rosaria Lopez and the severe injuries inflicted upon Donatella Colasanni. Instead, the court's task was to establish criminal responsibility for Angelo Izzo, Johnny Guido, and Andrea Guerra. Although Guerra remained a fugitive outside Italy, the legal process continued. The evidence assembled during the investigation, together with Donatella's testimony, formed the foundation upon which prosecutors presented the case. Throughout the proceedings, the case attracted extraordinary national attention because it represented more than an individual act of violence. Many observers viewed it as exposing broader issues concerning violence against women, the abuse of social privilege, and the willingness of certain offenders to exploit trust through deception. The fact that the victims had accepted what they believed was an invitation to a social gathering before becoming prisoners inside an isolated villa deeply disturbed the public. The deception involved in gaining their confidence became one of the defining features of the case, rather than encountering danger through chance. The victims had been deliberately lured into an environment where escape became impossible. As the trial progressed, another significant development emerged beyond the courtroom itself. Women's rights organizations participated in the proceedings as civil parties, reflecting the growing recognition that the crimes carried implications extending beyond the immediate victims. Their participation underscored the argument that violence against women should not be viewed solely as isolated criminal acts, but also as a broader social issue demanding public attention and institutional response. The case therefore became symbolic within Italy, contributing to national discussions about gender-based violence and the responsibilities of both society and the legal system in confronting such crimes. At the conclusion of the proceedings in 1976, the court delivered its judgment. Angelo Izzo, Johnny Guido, and Andrea Guerra were each sentenced to life imprisonment. The court found no mitigating circumstances that justified reducing the severity of their punishment. The sentence reflected the extraordinary gravity of the crimes and the suffering inflicted upon the victims. For many members of the public, the life sentences represented justice delivered with appropriate severity. The decision also appeared to bring a measure of finality to one of Italy's most traumatic criminal cases. Although no judicial decision could restore Rosaria Lopez's life or erase the suffering endured by Donatella Colasani, the convictions ensured that those identified as responsible would spend their lives under the authority of the Italian penal system. In the years immediately following the trial, the Cercio massacre became firmly established within Italian public memory. Newspapers, legal scholars, criminologists, and historians continued to examine the case as one of the most significant criminal prosecutions of the 20th century. Yet, while public attention gradually shifted toward newer events, the sentences imposed in 1976 continued to shape the lives of those involved. Angelo Izzo entered prison to begin serving his life sentence. Inside the correctional system, his behavior appeared, at least on the surface, to follow a pattern that many prison authorities hoped to encourage. According to the documented record, he devoted time to writing and participated in educational activities while incarcerated. Over the course of nearly 3 decades, he presented the image of an inmate engaged in self-improvement. Such behavior naturally became relevant within a correctional philosophy that viewed rehabilitation as one of imprisonment's principal objectives. Across many democratic legal systems, life imprisonment does not necessarily eliminate every opportunity for gradual reintegration into society. Correctional authorities often evaluate prisoners over many years, considering institutional conduct, participation in educational programs, and other indicators that may suggest reduced risk. Angelo Izzo's conduct during imprisonment eventually became part of that evaluation. However, the apparent signs of rehabilitation did not convince everyone responsible for assessing his future risk. According to the documented information surrounding the case, several psychological experts continued expressing serious concerns about his personality and behavior. Their evaluations suggested that Izzo displayed manipulative tendencies, lacked genuine empathy, and continued to present a significant risk of violent reoffending. These assessments introduced an increasingly difficult question into the discussion surrounding his imprisonment. Good institutional behavior alone does not necessarily reveal whether a prisoner has undergone genuine psychological change. A prison environment differs fundamentally from life outside its walls. Compliance with institutional rules may reflect sincere rehabilitation, strategic self-interest, or some combination of both. Distinguishing between those possibilities represents one of the greatest challenges facing correctional systems throughout the world. The Angelo Izzo case would eventually demonstrate just how consequential that distinction could become. Despite the warnings expressed by psychological evaluations, the legal process governing imprisonment continued to consider rehabilitation alongside punishment. By late 2004, nearly 30 years had passed since the Cercio convictions. During that time, Italy's correctional system had monitored Izzo's institutional behavior, educational participation, and apparent adjustment to prison life. Ultimately, authorities granted him semi-libertà, or semi-liberty, a legal measure permitting him to leave prison during the daytime for work while requiring his return to custody each evening. At the time the decision was made, it represented confidence that carefully supervised reintegration could proceed within controlled limits. Semi-liberty did not restore complete freedom. Instead, it reflected a gradual transition intended to balance continued punishment with opportunities for social reintegration. Yet even before later events unfolded, the differing opinions surrounding Izzo's psychological evaluations illustrated the complexity of such decisions. Correctional authorities faced the difficult task of weighing decades of apparently cooperative behavior against professional warnings that suggested continuing danger. The legal system reached one conclusion. Later events would cause many to question whether that conclusion had been fatally mistaken. Looking back, the 1976 trial occupies a unique position within the broader story. At the time, it appeared to represent the successful conclusion of an investigation that had begun with one survivor's remarkable determination to live. The convictions affirmed that the perpetrators had been identified and punished. For many Italians, justice seemed complete. Few could have imagined that nearly 30 years later, one of those same convicted murderers would once again become the focus of national headlines. The life sentence imposed in 1976 had not ended the story. Instead, it marked the beginning of a second chapter, one that would test Italy's confidence in rehabilitation, reshape public debate about the release of violent offenders, and ultimately force the justice system to confront one of its most painful and controversial decisions. For nearly 3 decades after the convictions in the Cercio case, many Italians believed that the legal process had reached its conclusion. Angelo Izzo had been sentenced to life imprisonment alongside Johnny Guido and Andrea Gaira. The crimes committed against Rosaria Lopez and Donatella Colasani had become a permanent part of Italian criminal history, studied by legal scholars, discussed by journalists, and remembered by the public as one of the country's most shocking acts of violence against women. Time moved forward, governments changed, and new criminal cases occupied newspaper headlines. Yet within the prison system, the question that accompanies every long-term sentence continued to exist. Could a person responsible for extreme violence ever be considered rehabilitated? Could decades of incarceration fundamentally change someone whose past reflected repeated acts of brutality? The Italian correctional system, like many democratic justice systems, recognizes rehabilitation as one of the purposes of imprisonment. Punishment alone is not always viewed as the final objective. Instead, correctional authorities periodically evaluate inmates to determine whether years of confinement, education, and institutional discipline have reduced the risk they might pose to society. Angelo Izzo appeared, at least according to his conduct within prison, to fit the profile of someone making progress. During his imprisonment, he wrote extensively, participated in educational activities, and demonstrated behavior that appeared cooperative within the institution. These factors contributed to the decision reached in late 2004 to grant him semi-liberty. Under this arrangement, Izzo was permitted to leave prison during the daytime for work while returning to custody each evening. It represented a carefully structured form of supervised reintegration rather than unrestricted freedom. Even so, the decision remained controversial because psychological experts had continued expressing concerns regarding his personality. According to the documented evaluations, he demonstrated manipulative tendencies, lacked empathy, and presented a significant risk of violent reoffending. Those warnings would soon prove tragically significant. Less than a year after receiving semi-liberty, Angelo Izzo once again became responsible for the deaths of innocent people. During this period, he became acquainted with the family of a former organized crime member whom he had known while in prison. On April 28, 2005, he murdered Maria Carmela Linciano and her 14-year-old daughter, Valentina Majorano. According to the established facts, both victims were tied up, suffocated with plastic bags, and buried in the garden of a house near Ferrazzano. Their disappearance initiated another criminal investigation, one that ultimately led authorities back to a name that had already become infamous 3 decades earlier. The discovery of the victims did not occur by chance alone. According to the documented record, the bodies were recovered after accomplices cooperated with investigators and provided information that enabled police to locate the burial site. Once again, evidence and witness cooperation combined to reconstruct the events and establish criminal responsibility. For Italy, however, the shock extended far beyond the details of the investigation itself. The country was forced to confront an unsettling reality. A man already serving a life sentence for one of the nation's most notorious crimes had been considered sufficiently rehabilitated to receive a measure of freedom. While benefiting from that opportunity, he committed another double murder. Public reaction was immediate and profound. The second case transformed perceptions of Angelo Izzo permanently. Until then, the Cercio massacre had often been viewed as the defining crime of his life, a horrifying act committed in his youth for which he had received the harshest available punishment. The murders committed in 2005 fundamentally altered that understanding. They suggested continuity rather than transformation. The passage of nearly 30 years in prison had not prevented another act of lethal violence. For many observers, the second case became not only a personal tragedy for the victims and their families, but also evidence of a catastrophic failure within the system responsible for assessing dangerous offenders. The legal consequences followed. Angelo Izzo was prosecuted once again. Following the judicial proceedings, he received another life sentence for the murders of Maria Carmela Linciano and Valentina Majorano. The court later imposed an additional measure of 3 years of daytime solitary confinement as part of the aggregation of his life sentences. The decision ensured that he would remain incarcerated under even stricter conditions. Yet the new sentence carried a different meaning from the first. The original life imprisonment had been imposed after the Cercio massacre. The second reflected the realization that the opportunity for limited release had resulted in further irreversible loss of life. The implications extended well beyond one courtroom. Italy entered a period of renewed debate concerning the principles underlying its correctional system. Questions that had previously belonged mainly to legal scholars and criminologists now became matters of widespread public discussion. How should authorities evaluate prisoners convicted of exceptionally violent crimes? How much weight should be given to institutional behavior compared with psychological assessments? Can decades of apparently positive conduct inside prison reliably predict behavior once freedom, even limited freedom, is restored? These questions had no simple answers. But the Izzo case forced policymakers to confront them with new urgency. According to the documented impact of the case, the Italian parliament and the country's justice system reconsidered the regulations governing semi-liberty for prisoners convicted of particularly serious violent offenses. The murders committed in 2005 became a powerful argument for those who believed that existing safeguards required significant revision, while rehabilitation remained an important legal principle. The case demonstrated the potentially devastating consequences of underestimating the continuing risk posed by certain offenders. The discussion that followed did not reject rehabilitation as a concept. Instead, it focused on the difficulty of accurately distinguishing genuine personal change from behavior that merely appears cooperative within the structured environment of prison. For criminologists and forensic psychologists, the Angelo Izzo case became one of Italy's most extensively studied examples of violent recidivism. Researchers examined not only the original crimes, but also the broader institutional decisions that allowed his temporary release. The case illustrated the limitations of risk assessment and the enormous responsibility carried by professionals asked to evaluate whether an individual remains dangerous after decades of incarceration. Psychological evaluation has never been an exact science. Experts rely upon interviews, behavioral observations, historical records, and validated assessment methods. Yet no evaluation can predict future human behavior with complete certainty. The Izzo case became a sobering reminder that the consequences of an incorrect assessment may be measured not merely in legal error, but in human lives. At the same time, the case also highlighted an enduring tension within modern criminal justice. A legal system committed exclusively to punishment risks, abandoning the possibility that people can change. A system committed exclusively to rehabilitation risks, overlooking those individuals whose apparent progress conceals continuing danger. Democratic societies continually attempt to balance these competing values, protecting the public while preserving the principle that transformation remains possible. The Angelo Izzo case did not resolve that tension. Instead, it exposed its complexity more vividly than almost any other modern Italian criminal case. Throughout these debates, it remained essential not to lose sight of those whose lives have been permanently altered. Rosaria Lopez never reached adulthood beyond the age of 19. Donatella Colasani survived an ordeal that would forever shape the remainder of her life. And her courage as the sole surviving eyewitness ensured that justice became possible after the Cercio massacre. Decades later, Maria Carmela Linciano and 14-year-old Valentina Morano became victims of the same offender after the justice system had concluded that limited release could safely be granted. Their deaths transformed what many believed to be a completed chapter of criminal history into an ongoing lesson about responsibility, risk, and institutional decision-making. These four victims occupy different places within the chronology of the case. Yet together, they represent its true legacy. Their lives remind us that behind every legal debate are individuals whose futures were irrevocably stolen. Today, Angelo Izzo remains imprisoned in Italy, serving 2 life sentences. His name continues to appear in criminology textbooks, legal analyses, and discussions concerning violent offenders, not because of any fascination with the perpetrator himself, but because his case continues to challenge assumptions about justice and rehabilitation. The chronology is stark. Born in Rome in 1955, Convicted of participating in the Curcio massacre in 1976. Granted semi-liberty after nearly 30 years in prison. Responsible for another double murder in 2005. Sentenced once again to life imprisonment. These milestones are not merely dates within one man's life. They mark turning points in the evolution of Italian criminal justice and public understanding of violent recidivism. In the end, perhaps the image that best captures the significance of this case is not that of a courtroom or a prison cell. It is the image from which this story began, a parked Fiat on a quiet Roman street, a faint knocking from inside its trunk, and a police officer deciding to investigate what might easily have been dismissed as an insignificant sound. That single decision revealed not only a horrific crime, but also a survivor whose determination to live made justice possible. 30 years later, another investigation would reveal the painful reality that justice, once achieved, does not always mark the end of danger. The Angelo Izzo case continues to be remembered because it forces difficult questions that remain relevant today. How should societies judge the possibility of rehabilitation? How can institutions balance mercy with public safety? And how can the memory of victims remain at the center of discussions that so often become focused on those who harmed them? Definitive answers remain elusive. What endures instead is the responsibility to remember the victims, to learn from the failures revealed by this case, and to recognize that the ultimate purpose of criminal justice is not only to punish wrongdoing, but also to protect human life. The story of Angelo Izzo remains one of Italy's most enduring criminal cases precisely because it illustrates how decisions made inside courtrooms, prisons, and correctional systems can continue to shape lives decades after a verdict has been delivered. Some criminal cases fade with time. They remain preserved in court archives, referenced occasionally by historians or legal scholars, but gradually disappear from public conversation as new events replace old headlines. The Angelo Izzo case followed a different path. More than half a century after the crimes at San Felice Curcio and decades after the second double murder committed during semi-liberty, the case continues to occupy a unique place within Italian criminal history. It is remembered not because it was the bloodiest crime ever committed, nor because it involved an especially complex investigation. Instead, it endures because it forced Italy to confront uncomfortable questions that have never been fully resolved. Those questions concern violence, accountability, rehabilitation, and the limits of the justice system's ability to predict human behavior. Looking back across the chronology, one striking feature emerges immediately. Almost every major turning point in the case depended upon a decision made by another person. Two young women accepted what they believed was an invitation to a social gathering. Three men chose deception instead of honesty. A police officer investigated an unexpected sound coming from the trunk of an abandoned car rather than dismissing it. Donatella Colasani, despite catastrophic injuries, survived long enough to identify those responsible. Judges imposed life sentences after examining the evidence presented before them. Correctional authorities later concluded that one prisoner had demonstrated sufficient progress to receive semi-liberty. Finally, investigators solving the 2005 murders relied upon information supplied by accomplices to recover the victims and establish responsibility. None of these moments existed in isolation. Together, they formed a chain of decisions whose consequences extended across 3 decades. Perhaps the most enduring lesson concerns the distinction between punishment and rehabilitation. Modern criminal justice systems rarely define imprisonment solely as retribution. Democratic societies generally recognize several objectives at once: punishment for criminal conduct, protection of the public, deterrence of future crime, and, where possible, rehabilitation. These goals often exist in tension with one another. A sentence severe enough to satisfy public demands for accountability may still leave open the possibility that an offender can eventually change. Conversely, a system focused too heavily on rehabilitation risks, underestimating the danger posed by individuals whose outward behavior does not accurately reflect their continuing capacity for violence. The Angelo Izzo case illustrates that this balance is extraordinarily difficult to achieve. Nearly 30 years separated the Curcio convictions from the murders committed in 2005. During those decades, Izzo participated in educational activities, wrote extensively, and appeared to adapt successfully to institutional life. Those observations contributed to the legal decision granting semi-liberty. Yet psychological evaluations reportedly continued warning that he displayed manipulative characteristics, lacked empathy, and remained at significant risk of violent reoffending. The events of April 2005 transformed those warnings from professional concerns into tragic reality. As a result, the case has become an important subject of study within criminology and forensic psychology. Not because it provides easy answers, but because it demonstrates how uncertain risk assessment can be, even after decades of observation. Another lasting aspect of the case concerns privilege and accountability. Public reaction in 1975 was shaped not only by the brutality of the crimes, but also by the social backgrounds of the perpetrators. Angelo Izzo, Johnny Guido, and Andrea Guerra came from affluent Roman families. They had enjoyed opportunities that many people never receive. Their upbringing challenged the simplistic assumption that extreme violence emerges only from poverty or social deprivation. The case instead demonstrated that wealth and education alone cannot prevent criminal behavior when individuals repeatedly choose violence over responsibility. This realization forced broader public reflection about the relationship between social privilege, personal accountability, and the abuse of power. The Curcio case also became an important milestone in Italy's discussion of violence against women. The participation of women's rights organizations as civil parties during the trial reflected a growing understanding that crimes targeting women cannot always be viewed solely as isolated incidents. The case helped strengthen public awareness that gender-based violence deserved sustained legal, political, and social attention. While the criminal proceedings focused on establishing individual guilt, the wider national conversation addressed deeper questions about misogyny, power, and the responsibilities of institutions to recognize patterns of violence before they escalate into irreversible tragedy. Yet perhaps the greatest lesson lies in remembering where the story truly belongs. It is tempting, particularly in notorious criminal cases, to focus almost exclusively on the offender. Names like Angelo Izzo become permanently attached to history because of the extraordinary nature of their crimes. Over time, however, there is a risk that the victims become secondary characters within narratives dominated by the perpetrator. The historical record deserves a different emphasis. Rosaria Lopez was not simply one victim among many statistics. She was a 19-year-old young woman whose future ended before adulthood had fully begun. Donatella Colasani was not important merely because she testified. She survived circumstances in which survival seemed impossible and, through extraordinary resilience, ensured that those responsible could be identified and prosecuted. 3 decades later, Maria Carmela Linciano and her 14-year-old daughter, Valentina Marano, became victims of the same offender after the justice system concluded that limited release was appropriate. Their deaths transformed the discussion surrounding rehabilitation from an abstract legal principle into a devastating human reality. The influence of the case extended beyond public opinion and academic debate. According to the documented historical record, Italy's parliament and justice system reconsidered regulations governing semi-liberty for offenders convicted of particularly serious violent crimes. This was not an attempt to abandon rehabilitation altogether. Rather, it reflected recognition that assessing dangerousness requires exceptional caution when previous crimes demonstrate extreme and repeated violence. Every legal system must periodically learn from its failures. The Izzo case became one of those moments when painful experience prompted institutional reflection and policy review. It is also worth recognizing the role of ordinary individuals whose actions altered the course of events. The police officer who investigated the faint knocking inside the Fiat trunk could not have anticipated what awaited inside. That simple decision preserved the life of Donatella Colasani and made the subsequent prosecution possible. Likewise, investigators who carefully documented her testimony transformed a horrifying discovery into a coherent criminal case supported by direct eyewitness evidence. The justice system often depends upon such ordinary acts of professionalism, diligence, and persistence. They rarely receive the attention devoted to offenders, yet they frequently determine whether justice can be achieved. Ultimately, the Angelo Izzo case offers no comforting conclusion. It does not end with complete closure or a sense that every question has been answered. Instead, it reminds us that criminal justice is a human institution operating under conditions of uncertainty. Judges, investigators, psychologists, correctional officials, and legislators all make decisions using the best information available to them at the time. Sometimes those decisions protect lives. Sometimes they reveal limitations that become visible only after irreversible harm has occurred. The responsibility of later generations is not merely to criticize those decisions with the benefit of hindsight, but to study them carefully so that future judgments may become more informed. Today, Angelo Izzo remains imprisoned, serving 2 life sentences. His name continues to appear in discussions of violent recidivism, forensic psychology, and Italian legal history. Yet the enduring significance of the case should never rest upon the notoriety of the offender. Its true importance lies in what it teaches about the fragility of trust, the consequences of unchecked violence, the complexity of rehabilitation, and the lasting impact that a single criminal case can have on an entire nation's legal and social landscape. In the end, perhaps the most meaningful way to remember this case is not through the identity of the man who committed these crimes, but through the lives forever changed by them. Rosaria Lopez, Donatella Colasani, Maria Carmela Linciano, and Valentina Majorano remain the human foundation of this history. Their stories continue to remind us why justice exists, why vigilance matters, and why every decision within a criminal justice system carries consequences that may extend far beyond a courtroom or a prison wall. That is why the Angelo Izzo case continues to be studied, discussed, and remembered, not as a story that glorifies violence, but as one that warns of its devastating cost and of the enduring responsibility shared by society to protect the vulnerable. Pursue justice with integrity and learn from the darkest chapters of its own history. Every notorious criminal case eventually reaches a point where the facts are no longer disputed. The investigations have concluded. The trials have ended. The sentences have been imposed. The legal record becomes permanent. Yet history often asks a different question from the one answer in court. Instead of asking who committed the crime, history asks why the case continues to matter. Decades after the events at San Felice Circio and years after the second double murder committed during Angelo Izzo's period of semi-liberty, the answers lie not in sensationalism or in the notoriety of the offender, but in the enduring lessons left behind for Italy's justice system and for society as a whole. The chronology of this case appears straightforward when reduced to dates. Angelo Izzo was born in Rome in 1955. In September 1975, he participated in the crimes known as the Circio Massacre alongside Johnny Guido and Andrea Guerra. In 1976, all three received life sentences without mitigating circumstances. Nearly 30 years later, Izzo was granted semi-liberty. In April 2005, while benefiting from that measure, he murdered Maria Carmela Linciano and her 14-year-old daughter, Valentina Marano. He was convicted once again, receiving another life sentence, followed by the additional measure of 3 years of daytime solitary confinement after the aggregation of his sentences. Today, he remains imprisoned in Italy. These facts are clear. What remains less simple is understanding everything those dates represent. Behind every year in the timeline are lives interrupted, families devastated, and institutions forced to reconsider assumptions that had once seemed reasonable. For Rosaria Lopez, history ended before her 20th birthday. For Donatella Colasanti, survival meant carrying memories that would forever distinguish her from every other witness in the case. Her courage ensured that investigators could identify those responsible, transforming what might have become an unsolved homicide into one of Italy's best documented criminal prosecutions. 3 decades later, Maria Carmela Linciano and Valentina Marano became part of the same tragic history, demonstrating that the consequences of one judicial decision can extend far beyond the original sentence. Their names deserve to remain at the center of the story because every legal discussion surrounding Angelo Izzo ultimately returns to the human cost paid by those whose lives he destroyed. One of the most important legacies of the case is the reminder that criminal justice is never static. Laws evolve, correctional policies change, risk assessment methods improve through experience, research, and sometimes through painful failure. According to the documented history of this case, the second double murder prompted Italy's parliament and judicial authorities to reconsider the rules governing semi-liberty for prisoners convicted of particularly serious violent crimes. This reaction reflected more than public outrage. It represented institutional recognition that the balance between rehabilitation and public safety must be constantly re-examined. Every justice system faces this challenge. A society committed only to punishment risks, abandoning the possibility that individuals can genuinely change. A society that places unlimited confidence in rehabilitation risks, exposing innocent people to preventable harm when assessments prove incorrect. The Angelo Izzo case demonstrates that neither objective can be pursued without careful attention to the other. It also illustrates the limits of certainty. Psychological experts, correctional authorities, judges, and legislators all operate with imperfect information. Human behavior cannot be predicted with absolute accuracy. Even the most experienced professionals cannot guarantee that an individual who appears rehabilitated will never commit another violent offense. At the same time, they cannot assume that every person convicted of a serious crime will remain permanently dangerous. Criminal justice, therefore, exists within a space of probability rather than certainty. The tragedy of the Izzo case lies partly in showing how devastating the consequences can be when those probabilities are misjudged. For students of criminology and forensic psychology, this case continues to serve as a significant example of violent recidivism and the complexity of evaluating future risk. It demonstrates that institutional behavior, educational achievement, and apparent cooperation inside prison may provide valuable information. Yet they cannot by themselves answer the deeper question of whether an offender's underlying capacity for violence has truly changed. Researchers continue examining such cases precisely because each contributes to a broader understanding of how dangerousness should be assessed, and how legal systems might better protect the public without abandoning fundamental principles of fairness and rehabilitation. Equally significant is the case's place within the history of violence against women in Italy. The participation of women's rights organizations as civil parties during the original trial reflected an important moment in the country's legal and social development. The crimes were recognized not merely as isolated acts committed against two individuals, but also as part of a broader pattern requiring public attention and institutional response. That recognition helped shape subsequent conversations about gender-based violence, victims' rights, and the responsibilities of the justice system. While no single criminal case can transform society by itself, certain cases become milestones because they force conversations that can no longer be postponed. The Curcio case was one such moment. Yet perhaps the greatest lesson is surprisingly simple. True crime often risks giving disproportionate attention to offenders because their actions dominate headlines and historical records. Names like Angelo Izzo become widely recognized, while the people harmed by those crimes gradually fade into the background. Responsible storytelling should resist that tendency. The purpose of revisiting this history is not to magnify the identity of the perpetrator, but to understand the consequences of his actions and to honor those whose lives were forever altered. Rosaria Lopez should be remembered not only as a victim, but as a young woman whose future was taken from her. Donatella Colasani should be remembered not solely because she survived, but because her determination made accountability possible. Maria Carmela Linciano and Valentina Marano should be remembered as individuals whose deaths became the catalyst for renewed scrutiny of policies affecting dangerous offenders. Their stories remind us that every statistic, every court judgment, and every legislative reform ultimately concerns real human lives. There is another detail that deserves reflection. The entire course of this history changed because a police officer heard faint knocking from inside the trunk of an abandoned car and chose to investigate. It is impossible to know how events might have unfolded otherwise. What is certain is that one attentive decision preserved the life of Donatella Colasani and ensured that the crimes committed in the villa at San Felice Curcio would not remain hidden. Criminal investigations often depend upon sophisticated forensic science and extensive legal procedures. Yet they also depend upon ordinary professionals performing their duties with care, persistence, and attention to detail. Justice is frequently built upon such moments. As this story comes to a close, the questions raised by the Angelo Izzo case remain as relevant today as they were decades ago. How should society measure genuine rehabilitation? How can legal systems protect the public while preserving the possibility of personal change? What weight should psychological evaluations carry when balanced against years of apparently good institutional behavior? These are not questions with permanent answers. Each generation must confront them anew as legal standards, scientific knowledge, and social expectations continue to evolve. The Angelo Izzo case endures precisely because it refuses to offer easy conclusions. It demonstrates that justice is not simply the announcement of a verdict or the imposition of a sentence. Justice also involves learning from failure, strengthening institutions where weaknesses have been revealed, and ensuring that the experiences of victims continue to inform future decisions. The lasting importance of this case, therefore, lies not in the infamy of one offender, but in the determination of a society to understand what happened, acknowledge the suffering endured by the victims, and improve the systems designed to prevent similar tragedies. In the end, this is not a story about the life of Angelo Izzo. It is a story about the consequences of violence, the resilience of those who survive it, and the continuing responsibility of every justice system to balance punishment, rehabilitation, and public safety with wisdom and humility. More than 50 years after the events that began in a secluded villa near San Felice Surcio, the voices that deserve to echo most clearly are not those of the perpetrators, but those of the victims whose lives continue to shape Italy's understanding of justice. Their legacy remains the most enduring part of this history, reminding us that behind every criminal case are human beings whose stories deserve to be remembered with dignity, accuracy, and compassion long after the headlines have faded. By the time the Angelo Izzo case reached its final stage in public understanding, it had already moved beyond the boundaries of a single criminal prosecution. It was no longer only about the events of 1975 or even the murders committed in 2005. It had become a reference point in Italian legal and criminological discourse, a case repeatedly cited whenever the justice system confronted the difficult intersection between rehabilitation and public safety. The legal outcomes themselves are firmly established in the record. Izzo received life imprisonment for his role in the Surcio crimes and later received an additional life sentence fofollowing the 2005 double murder of Maria Carmela Linciano and Valentina Majorano, committed during his period of semi-liberty. These judgments confirmed the continuity of his incarceration under the strictest penal conditions available under Italian law. Yet the significance of the case does not rest in sentencing alone. It lies in what the system believed at different moments, and where those beliefs ultimately failed. The granting of semi-liberty in 2004 remains one of the most debated decisions connected to the case. At the time, it reflected a broader correctional philosophy that long-term incarceration, combined with institutional behavior and educational engagement, could justify gradual reintegration for some offenders. Izzo's case was evaluated within that framework. On paper, the indicators appeared compatible with supervised release during daytime hours. In practice, the assumptions underlying that decision proved deeply contested after subsequent events. Following the 2005 murders, Italian institutions faced renewed scrutiny. The central issue was not only whether one decision had been wrong, but whether the system itself had sufficient safeguards to evaluate the long-term risk posed by individuals convicted of extreme violence. Legislative and procedural discussions in the aftermath focused on tightening conditions for semi-liberty in cases involving severe violent offenses, particularly where psychological assessments indicated persistent risk factors such as manipulation, lack of empathy, and prior patterns of escalation. Within criminology and forensic psychology, the case has remained a frequently referenced example of the limits of predictive assessment. Experts often point out that risk evaluation is inherently probabilistic. No combination of behavioral observation, institutional compliance, or historical data can eliminate uncertainty. The Izzo case is cited precisely because it demonstrates how long periods of apparent stability inside controlled environments may not reliably translate into safe behavior outside them, even under supervision. At the same time, the case has also been used to reinforce an equally important principle: that abandoning rehabilitation entirely is not a viable solution in a modern justice system. The challenge lies not in choosing between punishment and rehabilitation, but in understanding how to balance them when dealing with individuals whose histories suggest extreme and repeated violence. The case does not provide a resolution to that tension, but it makes its consequences unmistakably visible. Beyond the institutional and academic implications, the human dimension remains central. The names associated with this case represent different points in a long and tragic timeline. Rosaria Lopez and Donatella Colasani in 1975, Maria Carmela Linciano and Valentina Majorano in 2005. Each life affected stands as a reminder that legal systems are ultimately measured not by theoretical coherence, but by the real-world outcomes of their decisions. Donatella Colasanti's survival continues to hold a unique place in the case history. Without her testimony, the original crimes might never have been reconstructed with clarity, and accountability might not have been achieved in the same form. Her role in the judicial process underscores how rare and consequential survivor testimony can be in violent crime cases, particularly when it becomes the primary evidentiary foundation for prosecution. Today, the Angelo Izzo case is studied less for its sensational aspects and more for what it reveals about structural vulnerability within systems of correctional release. It is referenced in discussions about parole policy, psychological risk assessment, and the ethical responsibilities of the state toward both victims and society at large. It is also used as a reminder that even long-standing incarceration does not automatically guarantee transformation, and that claims of rehabilitation must always be weighed against rigorous, multidisciplinary evaluation. Ultimately, the case resists simple interpretation. It does not offer reassurance that justice always corrects itself, nor does it suggest that reform is impossible. Instead, it stands as a record of decisions made under uncertainty, some of which led to irreversible consequences. What remains beyond all institutional analysis is the enduring presence of the victims within the historical memory of the case. Their experiences form the irreducible core of the narrative before legal systems, before public debate, and before academic interpretation. In the end, the Angelo Izzo case is not remembered because it explains violence. It is remembered because it forces an uncomfortable truth that even well-established systems of justice, operating with procedures designed to protect society, can still fail to anticipate the full weight of human behavior. And that recognition, more than any single verdict or reform, is what continues to define its legacy.